And the topic today is, are you asking enough questions? Um, Typically, we don't ask enough questions when we're talking to our customers and prospects. We tend to, if we come from a teaching background, and I'm going to make some generalizations here, so don't anybody take any offense, but if we come from a teaching background, we tend to talk a lot and try and teach the clients a bunch of information rather than asking them a lot of questions. So it's more of a one-way street from us to them. You know, there's the old cliche about we have one mouth and two ears, and we should do most of the listening. And if you listen to or subscribe to Dale Carnegie at all, he talks about that extensively. And that person who succeeds more often than not is the one who asks most of the questions. So whether it's and he brings the analogy of a dating situation to online and discussions online, is ask as many questions as you can, and the client and prospect will think you're a great listener. So that's the feeling that you want to have when you leave these appointments. But these are 10 of the major blunders that we do as advisors normally. If we haven't taken some training in terms of asking questions or being empathetic, we don't ask enough questions. Sometimes we go back to the office and we start proposing things or putting proposals together without really knowing what the client's actually looking for. We make assumptions. Our listing skills are not necessarily as good as they should be. And sometimes we get a little monotone. I'm going to try and watch my tonality today in the webinar to keep you interested and keep you engaged. But we tend to go into a monotone scenario because we're generally bored. We're generally bored unless we're specifically interested in the individual we're talking to. We know the material. We know what we're talking about. We know about life insurance. We know why they should have it. We know taxes. We know all the things that we need to know to do our job. And we can't assume that the client knows anything. And we can't assume that we know everything about the client. And I'll show you some examples of that as we move forward, where I've worked with advisors and I tell them a certain attitude to take when we go see clients jointly that is different than what they're used to. Let's look at some of these other blunders. Sometimes too much pressure. You might feel that you're pressuring the client at some point because you're trying hard for a close. As the line I always say now is that, when are you ready to make a sale? And I think it would be safe to say that we're always ready to make a sale. And the question really should be, when is the client ready to buy? Well, the client's ready to buy when you've motivated them or given them enough motivation to solve a problem that you've identified. Not having done that, they don't have a lot of urgency to solve their problem. That's why they give you the line, let me think about it. Can I get some more information? I can't really decide right now. I'll have to get my wife, my spouse, or whoever involved. And then we start going into that backup position of a little bit of pressure because we want to get things done and get them moving in the right direction. Typically, again, we talk too much. We know way more than they do about life insurance, and we want to tell them everything that we know, because we think that's the way to prove our professionalism, and not necessarily true. We don't build enough value to the client prospect, and we sometimes even myself, fall into these cheesy closing lines because they're really easy to use, and we sometimes fall into the trap of using these. You might hear yourself in a sales call throwing one of those out there every once in a while. One thing we don't want to do is wing it. So hopefully after today, we'll give you some skills as to how to not wing it. And negative mindset. I mean, the trouble with our job is that, you're the manager, the owner, the motivation speaker, the accountant, you're pretty much everything in your business. And sometimes we get a little down and a little negative, and we can't obviously go to see a client with a negative mindset, or they're not going to buy. I don't know why I'm showing it anyway. It's too much premium. We go in with those kinds of attitudes, and generally you're right? You can be right or wrong, and if we go with a negative mindset, we position that ourselves as a negative ninny, and we don't want to be doing that. So we want to set the tone, and when I mean setting the tone, I'm talking about propriety. And propriety is one of those things where depending on the client and the market that you're in, if you're working with farming clients, again, some generalizations, if you're working with farming clients, we don't want to go there in a three-piece suit or a suit and nice shiny shoes to the farmer's land because they're going to think it's Revenue Canada or the bank coming. We want to make sure we dress appropriately, we speak appropriately, and we have the right attitude. So if we're seeing somebody in their office downtown Toronto or downtown Edmonton, Vancouver, Montreal, or Halifax, we want to dress appropriately for that situation. Today, you might notice I've dressed up a little bit for this particular situation. Sometimes you can get away with today on these webinars having a golf shirt on, but I wanted to set the tone today in that it's a little bit more of a professional presentation. And we also want to demonstrate our competence. We can do that by talking about other people that we've helped in the past, someone that was referred to the current prospect or client, obviously. But if you have your CLU, CFP, CHFC, or CHS, some other course experience, you might want to go through that in your opener. When you're building some commonality, and the next point in our list here is establishing commonality with your client to set up that warm, friendly environment where you can actually have a conversation and they'll disclose important information that you need to go away with. You want to make sure that you establish a good rapport. And the full package would be the trusted advisor. I mean, we hear that term all the time today. We want to be their trusted advisor. And, it's funny, Limmer did surveys years ago about, they surveyed 100 people or so and said, who are you most suspicious of in terms of the advisors that you work with, or advisors in general? And life insurance agents were right at the bottom, down with used car salesmen. But when they asked people who had life insurance advisors, they were the number one trusted advisor, because people had had a different experience, obviously personally, than they had heard about. And they have, if you went around and asked your client who they talk to when they go make a professional business decision, typically you're involved in that discussion. I mean, you have earned the trust of that client, and you become referable. And it's because of your intent. You're always looking in the best interest of the clients. Whenever I have ever traveled across Canada, I've always thought if I ever got into a problem someplace in any one city, I'd look up insurance advisor in the phone book and ask them for help, because most of you, and I would say every one of you, is out there to help. I mean, if you help your friends, you refer people to other professional occupations, and we're really seen as a go-to person. I'm going to go to the next slide here. One of the things that you really have to do as well is set out the roadmap to success. The roadmap for your client is they don't know the purpose of the process and the payoff that they're going to experience during this meeting. Hopefully, the purpose of this meeting today is to show you some ways to think about questioning a little differently. The process is we're going to walk through this webinar and have some interaction in a couple of seconds. And the payoff will be that I have some reference material that I'm going to make available to you. Lisa and I put together a great little document with all kinds of sample questions, whether you're a pre-retiree, a post-retiree, or a retiree. And there's a series of questions in each of those situations that you'll be able to utilize in moving forward and hopefully helping you with your discovery process. I'm going to walk through the discovery process leading up to this. Is one of the things with working with adults is you typically want to ask permission to ask questions. So the way I position it is, and I'll show you these 10 questions in a few minutes, and those of you who use Circle of Wealth will recognize these 10 questions, but whenever I meet with somebody, I do the rapport building, get the small talk going, get some established rapport. And then I ask them this question: would it be okay if I asked you a few questions? And I've positioned it saying that this meeting will be either 30 minutes or 45 minutes, depending upon how many questions we want to get into today. But I want to ask you some questions that'll give me a clear understanding of where you are now and where you want to be. And then I go through this series of 10 questions that I'm going to demonstrate to you in a few minutes. But I ask fact-finding questions, obviously, and I ask feeling-finding questions. You can't just ask fact-finding questions. And I'll refer to this now. All of you, I'm sure, have some form of fact finder. I'm going to hold it up for a second here. Is this the 411 fact finder form, or the confidential personal fact finding form that's available on the IDC website? There are multitudes of fact finding forms, whether you're using a Manulife or a Canada Life National Tax and Estate Planning fact finding form, or your own devised fact finding form, or a yellow piece of paper. We all typically have some kind of fact finder that we use as a guide. And there's a plus side to a fact finder and a downside. And I want to walk through that in a couple of minutes, just comparing the questions that are asked and the questions that should be asked relative to those questions that we ask. So listening selectively, I mean, you want to listen to all the things that you feel are important, obviously, in this process. Listen responsively. You want to react. You can't just sit there like a statue and not react to their commentary. You want to nod your head, and body language is a key element in a proper fact find. So I would encourage you to demonstrate and practice your body language as much as possible, where appropriate, obviously. And then listen empathically. You want to make sure that they see you listening and you're understanding what they're saying. If they have some concerns about, maybe the parents are going to have to move into the house, or they're going through a tough time, or currently, obviously, with COVID, they're going through some stress, some strenuous situations. You want to definitely demonstrate empathy. That'll get you a long way in terms of getting information that you need to go back to the office and put together the written report. The other thing you want to do is summarize the interview orally. So you might want to say something like, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is, and then reposition, feedback what it is they said, and that'll give them the opportunity to acknowledge that if you in fact listened correctly and you got the data that they gave you. If there's a misunderstanding of what they said and what you thought they meant, you can eliminate that at that point. And then you can summarize it again, re-summarize it, and gain agreement. So if I understand you correctly, this is what you're saying, and they agree to that, and you move forward to the next step in your process. And then you may in fact summarize the interview in written form later. So what I typically do is I'll go away from an appointment, depending on how long that appointment has been. If it's been an hour fact-finding appointment, I might go away, put together a written discovery agreement, which we'll talk about at the end of the presentation today. And when that discovery agreement comes back, it elicits all the information. It reiterates all the information that I discovered in that first appointment. And it makes sure that we're not digging two tunnels. We're both on the same wavelength. We're both speaking the same language. And I've gained agreement. And I want to gain agreement again that I'm headed in the right path, because you don't want to end up at the end of your presentation with, well, leave it with me and let me think about it. You want to avoid that as much as possible. And if you do this process correctly, you can, in most cases, avoid that scenario. So good discovery skills, the way I set it up, and here's a sentence that I will make the PowerPoint available if it's something that you'll want. Mr. Prospect, I did promise not to take more than an hour of your time this morning, and I know your time is valuable. I think we'll both find this hour well spent. Would it be okay if I went ahead and asked you a few questions? So there's one way to get agreement and get permission to go ahead and ask those questions. Another way to state that is to, Mr. Prospect, as I indicated to you last week, I'm more willing to do a complete analysis of your financial planning situation for you with no obligation whatsoever on your part. That's what today is all about. Frankly, I have no idea whether we'll turn up any problems in the present situation. The information you'll provide today will determine that. But even if we do, I certainly assure you that whether you want to proceed further with me, of course, is totally up to you. So you can see the low pressure positioning of, I'm going to share some information with you, gather some data, put together a presentation, bring it back to you, and whether or not you proceed, of course, is completely up to you. But I think in most cases, once they see the discovery agreement, they'll be pretty impressed with the amount of work that you've done, the amount of preparation, the fact that you were listening empathically and you were putting together a presentation that addressed all their concerns, and they're going to move forward on some of your proposal. So as I told you then, it's worth it for me in the long run to offer these services. Hopefully you'll think of me when you're ready to take some action, and should we proceed now? So that's really, is it okay to ask you some questions based on where I said we were going to go? Again, types of questions. I mentioned fact-finding and feeling-finding questions. Fact-finding questions are aimed at clarifying your prospect's current financial situation, economic status, and other objective data that are critical to your analysis. But the feeling-finding questions are where the meat of the interview is. Its feeling finding questions are directed toward discovering the prospect's needs, wants, goals, aspirations, and expectations. So there's relationship needs that need to be met as a result of these feeling finding questions. Fact finding questions are the actual facts that I could ask you where you lived, and I can't open this up to a discussion, unfortunately, but if I could pick on somebody and say, why do you live where you live? It's like, I know where your address is, but why are you living there? And there are reasons that each of you are living where you're living. It was the convenience of where the house was located. It was proximity to schools and shopping. It was out in the country because you wanted to be alone. But there's a reason each of you live where you live, because you have the choice to live anywhere. So I want to know not where you live, because I'm probably in your office or at your house. I want to know why you live there. And if you center on the why of things, you know, how much do you have in your RSP isn't as important as what is your retirement going to look like? What's the plan? And we'll get into that as we move forward, as I said, in these questions. But feeling finding questions are asked to bring subjective data. They sound out the prospect's emotions and personal feelings, considerations, opinions, doubts, and worries, all the things that point to the unmet relationship needs. And it's just as important to discover why a prospect wants something as it is to know what the prospect wants. So the why. So if they want to retire at 55, well, why? And then you can go back to the facts of how much resources have they accumulated so far for that potential retirement at 55. And then you might find out that, well, it was kind of an idea, not necessarily the plan. And they don't have enough resources, or they're not headed towards having enough resources at 55 to retire at 55 with the income level that they'd like to be at. So they're going to have to make some changes. And in the Circle of Wealth software, we have a program called Retirement Ready or Not. And it really clearly illustrates how ill-prepared they are for retirement at this particular point. Sometimes it shows them that they're ready for retirement. If you did a Razor plan or any of the carriers software planning programs in retirement planning, you can show how far away, what the gap is between their desired position and where they are now. What you need to determine is how important is it to be in that desired position before they move forward to putting more money away, or looking at lost opportunity cost, redistribution of assets, to get to that goal of retiring at 55, 60, 71, wherever it happened to be. So I'm going to do an exercise now with you, and I want you to participate in this in the chat. And I know you could sit there passively and just watch me do this for an hour, but I'd rather not. So you should have received a copy of the IDC fact-finding form. This is if we had a limited number of people who pre-registered for the workshop. It would be that 411 form that I talked about. But if you skim through a discovery questionnaire, identify 10 fact questions, no, we're not going to do 10, we're going to do 2 or 3. So I'd like anybody, to send me in the chat room a sample fact-finding question. So take a minute and just enter in the chat a typical fact-finding question. And I'm going to give you a minute to actually do that. And if I don't see one in a minute, I'll pick on somebody. Well, let me go to my registration list. Chuck Nelson. There you are, Chuck. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, here's some good examples. Yeah, do you have a TFSA account? So there's a fact-finding question, and that's a yes or no question. So not really, it's valuable in that I want to know if you have one, but there's a better way to ask that question, or more details. What is your annual income? Another great question. It's just a fact-finding question. How can we add a feeling-finding question to each of those? So let's get an example of, do you have any pre-existing issues? Fact-finding question. Or do you have a TFSA? So let's deal with the TFSA one first. Give me a sample or an example of a feeling-finding question about the TFSA. So the questionnaire, good question, is where's the questionnaire? The questionnaire is on Win Big. And if you even go into the help or the chat room on Win Big, they'll direct you to where to find the fact-finding questionnaire. I can send you, I'm going to actually share, I'll go to share the fact finder for a second to show you where what I'm talking about. Oh, you know what? It's next. So hang on a second. Let me cancel that. I'm going to scoot ahead to a couple of slides. There you go. Might be a bit small on your screen. You'll have to blow that up because I can't, oh, just a minute. Maybe I can. Yes, I can. There you go. So there's a typical fact-finding questionnaire. It's got home, address, place of birth, plans for future employment, employment history, kind of standard stuff. You know, like do you have children, married, assets, liabilities, you know, do you have cash in the bank? So here's a great feeling finding question. Do you feel like you're paying too much tax? So that would be a yes or no, but it would give you feel. How do you feel about paying the tax that you're paying? Might be a more, you know, I'd say not good, right? It's not a yes or no. But how do you feel about your children-in-law? Well, there you go. Are you prepared for an emergency? So how prepared are you for an emergency, or are you prepared for emergency? Great question. A feeling finding question. How do you feel about paying too much tax? Great question. We're going to delve into that a little bit as we move forward as well. Do you feel about the tax when you maximize your tax savings? How do you feel about the tax, and do you maximize your tax saving vehicles? Do you like to share your successes with the government? I like that one, Judith. That's a good one. Yeah, there's some great examples, right? And you get more from, you know, how do you feel about where you're living right now? Or is there anything that you would change about where you're living if you could? And they say no, well, they're very happy about where they're living. So, you know, if they're happy with their other financial advisor, I want to know that. If you go through here, let's see if there's any more. Good. So again, expenses, but there's not a lot of places in here that actually have feeling finding questions. We've always trained advisors to focus on the actual facts. You know, if you go back to Dragnet, you know, that's probably going back pretty old for some of you, but the facts, ma'am, just the facts. But the facts just don't help us enough. The facts are what we, as a typical advisor, as a basically trained advisor, that's what we would focus on. We get the facts, go back to our office, and put together a plan that we know would be better for them, but we don't necessarily have them on board with what we're thinking. So are you comfortable enough with your current advisor to allow me to give you a second opinion on your financial plan? Good. Good. So we're getting some participation. That's what I wanted. So let's go to our next. I'm going to have to shrink this down a bit now and go to our next piece. Uh, uh, Lisa, I might have to get you to move me forward. Okay. I'll get the next slide up here in a second. Sorry about that. Another way to position some of this material is in a third party. You know, you have, there we go. It's not hitting it. Third party questions. So, you know, Bob, a client of mine, about your actual age, actually lets me know every time I see him that the biggest pleasure he gets from his financial planning is knowing that his wife or spouse wouldn't have to return to work in case he becomes disabled, for at least as long as their children are growing up. What's your feeling about that? So you can defer this to a third party. So you might say something like, you know, many of my clients think that, or I recently read, what do you think about that? So it gives you the ability to deflect it. It's not your idea. it's from some other third party, in the nebulae out there. So well, not everybody feels that way. You can blame them for that particular thought, but you can you can everybody can see this, right? Just somebody say in the chat, you can see this slide, third party questions. Yes. Okay, perfect. Yeah, you can deflect this to a third party as opposed to being responsible for this commentary. And that's sometimes a safe way to handle that. But the types of questions, or how do you feel about that? What do you think about that? Why, in your opinion, is that a problem? How would you do it differently if you could? What would you feel is important in terms of saving more money for retirement? Or what's your biggest worry in terms of your estate preservation? You can throw in any line, any word in there that you want and center it around where the discussion or where you want to have that discussion head. So what do you like best in terms of your present program? Most of my clients always say to me, where were you? What? Sorry. Most of my clients always say to me, where were you 10 years ago? I wish I've known about that before. Yeah, well, that's true. One of the things that we say with Circle of Wealth and LEAP planning or Truth Concepts planning is, if this is so good, how come I've never heard about it before? Or why didn't you tell me this 10 years ago when we first met? Well, you can center that off and say that technology's changed. I've become aware of some things that I didn't really know about earlier on in my career, or I've recently discovered, or I have a new way of doing things. It's a way to reposition yourself to your current clients. I've recently discovered something I need to share with you, and I'll go through something here in a few minutes that will show you something like that. But what do you like best about your current and present program? It's called testing the extremes. What do you like best about what your present program looks like, or what do you like least about your present program? And the reason you do the best and least is you want to make sure that you can maintain what they currently have that they like, and what they like least, you want to eliminate that and replace that with more of what they like most, right? And so that's one thing that we talk about a lot with Circle of Wealth. So here's a question. I'd like you to complete this in the chat room as well. Is what do you feel is important in terms of your loved one's financial security? What do you feel is important in terms of your loved one's financial security? Let's get somebody to put a few things in the chat here. I just saw a comment in here. It says the key when doing interviews, whether it's in person or Zoom, is to dance while everything in your pen goes dry, or losing internet speed. Now, hopefully your internet speed's good today. But yeah, so if someone wants to complete that, what do you feel is important in terms of your loved one's financial security? I'd want to ensure that my kids would be a good education if I were to pass away. Perfect. Knowing that they are secure no matter what happens in life. Yeah, great. I mean, these are the kinds of things that so if I understand you correctly, you want to make sure there's enough money to do all the things that you wanted to do even though you weren't here. That gives me a line that if you could have all the insurance possible without any additional out-of-pocket expense, how much of that insurance would you like? And people will say as much as possible, because that'll allow me to do all the things I couldn't do, or have done all the things I couldn't do if I wasn't here. And then it's our job in these processes to go find the money, or as much of the money as we can, without reducing their lifestyle, to make sure we can do that. People move in the direction of their wants. And if that's what they want to have happen, they will find money or sacrifice money from other things to put plans in place that will achieve the end result, whether it's a better retirement and I'm alive and living and can enjoy it, or whether I died prematurely and wasn't here to enjoy it, but the cash cow stopped. So I want to make sure that my kids will have a good education, knowing that they will be secure no matter what. And what else have I got here? Yeah, that's the same as the one before. They're concerned, their concern is to be financially independent. Yeah. They don't need to change their standard of living until they are truly independent. And what most people don't, when they say that, they don't realize how much money it actually costs. You and I know that clients are entitled to have 20 to 35 or 30 times their income, depending on the carrier and what they're doing for an occupation and where they are in their stage of life. But you're allowed to have, if you're a young professional, up to about 25 to 30 times their income. But when you go see people for the first time, they're never sitting there with that much money, insuring themselves for that much money. They fully insure their house, fully insure their car, but they might have insured themselves for 250 or 500 and think that it's a lot of money, not realizing the value of their most valuable asset, themselves at work. And in our software programs, we can illustrate how much that money is. When you do a disability insurance replacement calculation, income replacement calculation, there used to be a chart in the back of the Can Life brochure that had, if you're 30 years of age and made $60,000, you're going to make $4.2 million by the time you're 65. But when you say it and show it like that, people don't realize that's how much money is slipping through their fingers. And they want to protect that. But they don't want to sacrifice, unfortunately, today, they don't want to sacrifice today's needs and wants for a future that they may not be participating in. So what's your biggest worry in terms of your retirement is another way. It's not a yes or no question. So let's, what some typical answers would you get to that question? What's your biggest worry in terms of your retirement? Some of your comments are pretty funny. Okay. So here's a good one. Worried that I won't be able to afford to retire. So I can answer that in 5 minutes if you'd like me to. I've got a program that'll allow you to get a calculation. I have a sample of a document. So I'm going to jump to that if I can here. I'm going to go like this. I've opened that one up. Take a look at this document. So this is a Circle of Wealth document. Now, you don't have to have Circle of Wealth to use this document. I can email this document to you. And you can use Razor to do this or any software program that you have. But this is a nice pre-approach piece that I would send to all my clients. Like if you're sitting at home right now wondering when your next piece of business is coming in or where it's coming from, if you're serious about your financial future, you should know the answer to these 4 questions. And it's like, I can give you the answer to these in less than 10 minutes. When do you want to know? So the questions are, what rate of return do you have to earn in your savings and investment dollars to be able to retire at your current standard of living and have money last through your life expectancy? So what rate of return do you need on your savings to have enough to have for the rest of your life? How much do you need to save on a monthly or annual basis to be able to retire at your current standard of living and your money still last until life expectancy? Doing what you're currently doing, how long would you have to work to be able to retire at your and live at your current lifestyle and life expectancy to life expectancy? And if you don't do anything different than you are currently doing, how much will you have to reduce your standard of living to retire for your income to last for your life expectancy? Those are 4 questions that everyone wants to know the answer to. So this brochure was created to be able to position the opportunity for you to go in and solve that query. And that will generate you tons of business, because if you're using Razor or if you're using Circle of Wealth, you can have the answer to that question in about 15 minutes and not waste a lot of the client's time. And they will be surprised, shocked, and awed as to how quickly you came up with those numbers and where they are. And no one wants to no one wants to work longer than they anticipate. And no one wants to live at a reduced lifestyle when they retire. So they might have to do some things to restructure what they're currently doing to make sure that they can live at the current lifestyle. So worried that I won't be able to afford to retire, good one, outliving my money. So the phrase that I use today is, what if I could guarantee that I can put a program together that you will pay less taxes now, less taxes in the future, and never run out of money? Is that more of what you're looking for? When you say that phrase and position it like that, they are comfortable knowing that they will never run out of money. I can show them in an illustration pretty quickly how to never face that potentiality. Now, can you cure everybody? No. Can you help everybody? Yes. So we can't cure everybody. There are some people who are not losing money unknowingly and unnecessarily, and there are some people who just are not going to, they are going to have to reduce their lifestyle when they retire. But if you're target marketing, and if you're working in an upscale market and targeting that upscale market, you will be able to put things in place that they would never have thought of and maximize the efficiency of their money at work. That's the role of that trusted advisor. I want to look for places where you might be losing money unknowingly and unnecessarily and redeploy that money to create more wealth and have you in a position to pay less tax moving forward. So if I could do that, is that something you'd like to see? So the scenario here is that I want you just to realize that you have to marry a fact-finding question with a feeling-finding question. So how likely is it that any of your parents or in-laws will be dependent upon you for support? How do you feel about providing for their support? Potentially. And do you have children attend college? Somebody mentioned this in the chat here. Graduate school. How do you feel about the importance of a college education? Is that important for you to assist them in their college education? I'm just looking through the chat. Yes, I can forward that retirement questionnaire to all participants in the chat room, so on the line. So now I'm going to walk through the 10 questions that, yes, you're right too. Equisoft has a good retirement calculator. I forgot about Equisoft for a second there. You're right. So if you want the retirement planning program with Equisoft, there's a retirement calculator in the Equisoft software, which is your CRM. We endorse the Equisoft as the CRM for IDC advisors, and we get a discount for that. So you can go to our webpage and look at that. You can download that software and take a look at it. If taxes go up, I will not have the funds that I counted on. Absolutely. So we've got to put some plans in place that go up equivalent or proportionally with potential taxes that you might be faced with in the future. If I could do that, is that something you'd like to see? They always say yes. So I'm going to walk through these 10 questions that I use every time I see somebody. And what I said earlier was about, having a roadmap. When you go see somebody, you need to think about the appointment, obviously, before you go there, not 5 minutes before you go there. And you want to have a roadmap or a series of questions. I use these 10 questions every time I get together with a client. And it gives me an idea of a couple of things. One is what they believe to be true, what they believe in, and what they have, and what they don't have, and what they're looking for. So let me walk through these for a moment. And I use these it's obviously I couldn't do this here. It's on a full sheet of paper. And I leave space for the answers below each of these questions. And the first question is, if it's a referral, and I know they were referred to me, I'd quickly go over that question, but how did you hear about us? And do you know what we do? Do you know anything about our company? What's really interesting about that question is, you might go see a current client or a new client and say, do you actually know what I do? Or someone who's referred to you. They might have been referred to you, say, you've got to go see Don. And I go see the person and I go, did Frank tell you anything about what I actually do? And no, he just said I should see you. Well, let me tell you a bit about what I do. So then that gives you the opportunity to do the opener about what it is you actually do. Then I want to know what they're currently doing. So I want to know, what are you currently doing in preparation for your financial future? And the way I position that question is a little subtly different. I ask them, what kinds of financial instruments have you purchased up until now? You're currently how old? And they say 45. I say, well, 45 years of age, you've probably made some purchases of some financial instruments. What have you purchased up until now in preparation for your financial future? And they'll tell you. They'll say a TFSA. And I'm not asking specifically how much is in your TFSA or how much life insurance you have, or I don't need the numerical numbers about any of these things right now. I just want to know what clubs they have in the club bag. What did they buy because the press, Susie Orman, Dave Ramsey, all the noise told them to go buy? So they might have a TFSA with $2,500 in it and $16,000 on a credit card. not a lot of sense, but I'm not going to get into a debate about how important it is to keep the credit card debt low and how, stupid it is to have a TFSA at that particular moment in their financial career. I'll get to that, but I'm not going to have that debate at this moment. All I want to know is, what have they purchased up until now? Tell me a little bit about it. And they do. Then I ask them, what do you like most about what you're currently doing? Now, when they hear that question, they think, well, if they think globally or holistically, they might think, what I'm doing generally holistically. I'm trying to pay down my debt, and I'm trying to acquire enough money to make a real estate purchase so I can create some rental properties. I go, great, I'll write that down. I don't get into a whole long debate about that either. I want to get through these 10 questions. My goal is to get through these 10 questions and learn as much about them, about their thinking process as I can in a short span of time, because I need to know if I can help them or not quickly. So what don't you like about your current financial position? This is what I was telling you about testing the extremes. Is like, what do you like best about what you have? What don't you like about your current financial position? Well, I've got a little bit too much debt right now. My mortgages, I just moved to a bigger house because the interest rates are so low, but I've got a little bit bigger mortgage than I thought I'd have at this point in my life. And I see rates are going up and the market just crowd, blah, blah, blah. They go on, but I don't mean it to be, disparaging. They'll go on and tell you a long story about what they don't like about your current financial position. I need to know that. That's very, very, very important. That gives me my roadmap to their future. What would you like to see enhanced or improved? They always say, more money. I wish I had more. And they'll say different things. I mean, I can't generalize here. The one thing I would tell you is that I try to go to appointments by not having preconceived notions about what it is they're doing or what they have. And this is where I was going to say to you earlier, when I go jointly to see an advisor's client, if I'm going on a joint appointment, the advisor and you, if you were taking somebody with you, you think that, well, I'm going to take a few minutes and tell you everything I know about the client so you know about them before we go see them. And I tell the advisor at that moment, don't tell me anything about your client. I don't want to know anything, because then I'm going to have preconceived notions about your client that I don't want to have. I'd rather just have my 10 questions that I'm going to ask, and I'm going to give you the ability to introduce us. You hand it over to me, and then I'm going to walk through these 10 questions. I would suggest to you that you could take these 10 questions and go see current clients and ask them these 10 questions, and it would be a different experience than your experience up to date with those clients. And some of the things you think you know, but you don't, because they've never asked these questions. You've never asked some of these questions before. And that's the answer that I usually get. I said, how come you've never, they turn to the advisor that I'm with and they go, how come you've never asked me these questions? I go, well, I didn't know about them. But it gets a little awkward sometimes, but generally we cover it off pretty quickly, and it comes out okay. But I would suggest to you that these 10 questions are probably the most powerful questions you'll ever come across. What has been your past experience with preparing for your financial future? What you're really asking is, do you currently have another advisor? Is there somebody that you're working with? Or they might tell you the bad story about the advisor that ripped off their parents, or the advisor that they didn't like, or never saw them again after they bought a term policy 20 years ago. Or they'll have some experience there, though. I want to hear that experience. I want to know that if there's somebody else in the picture, some other advisors they're working with, I need to know that at that moment. That gives me an idea of their sophistication and how much they've been working with these people. What would you ideally like to accomplish with your financial strategy? That one's an interesting question, and I have two paths that I go down with that question. They may have a strategy, they may not, and they may not know what you're talking about. If they have a strategy, the ones that I've come up with a lot is that, I'm buying real estate properties. My financial strategy is to keep my debt low, but I believe in real estate. I don't have an RSP, as I said earlier in question number 2. I don't have RSPs, but I buy real estate properties, and that yes, you'll get the 10 questions. And I have these properties. I'm counting on these properties to be my retirement plan. I go, great, but I need to know that. If they don't have a financial strategy at all, I ask them this question. Let's take a minute now and develop a product that you would feel would be something you'd like to invest in. So what attributes would you want this product to have? And sometimes when I go see people, I ask for a glass of water or a bottle of water. Everybody's got water these days when I go to appointments. I say, have you got any water? And they'll bring either a glass or a bottle. And I have that bottle in front of me up till this point. I may have taken a drink out of it. I may not have. But at this point, I touch that bottle. And I grab the bottle like a prop and I say to them, let's for a minute imagine this is the newest financial investment ever created. And we're going to create it right now. What would you want it to do in terms of its attributes? So, and what I mean by that is, I'll give you an example. Would you want it to grow tax sheltered? And then they go on. They go, yes, I want it to be tax sheltered. And if they don't have the answers to all the questions that I want, I guide them a little bit. I go, well, would you want it to have any limits and contribution limits? Because earlier, remember in question 2, they said they had an RRSP or they had a TFSA. And sometimes I'm with a wealthy client. He's maxed out his RRSP, he's maxed out his TFSA, and he's doing company match at his company. Like he's done everything. He's bought a real estate property. I go, well, if you earlier you mentioned you had a TFSA and the maximum contribution this year is $6,000, how do you feel about that? I go, well, it sucks. So if I had $200,000 cash and I gave it to you right now, would you put it in your TFSA? Or would you catch it up? Or would you max out on it? If it could take 200,000, would you put it in? They always say yes. I go, great. And I just keep going. And I get them to, if this thing ever had a market downturn like we had this week, did you panic at all this week when the market went down by 1,000 points? Did that scare you? Yeah, I was a little nervous about that. I'm heavily in equities because I've had 11 years of great equity performance, and I'm a little nervous. Oh, so if I had the ability to never be subjected to a negative return, is that something that would be of interest to you? They always say yes. I go, and what rate of return would you expect? And then you give them, and today what's nice is that most people, when you ask them what rate of return would you expect, they don't say 12, 13, or 14%. They say something like 3, 5, 4, and 6. They're more reasonable now in terms of their expectation just because of what we've gone through for the last 10 years. Then I ask them this important question, tell me about your decision-making process. When you made your last big financial decision, bought a car, a house, what was the process you went through to purchase that object? Did you, and they'll tell you, I was buying a car and I went online, I researched it. By the time they get to a car dealership today, everybody knows what they're looking for other than the exact price they're going to pay for that car. They've researched it. They've gone online. They have the internet. They've heard what other people said about that car. They might go online and look at real estate properties. Their spouse is online with them looking at houses. They've researched the hell of it before they make a major capital purchase. I need to know the process they go through to make that decision. Sometimes they'll say to you, and it usually is wealthier people will say, I just go with my gut. If it feels right, I do it. I need to know that. That's helpful in the decision-making process moving forward. And then I ask this next question, and I position this a little differently as well. I go, these are long days. We're all working pretty hard. Even working from home, you're working hard. You're working longer at home than you did when you went to the office. I go, but you work all day. What time do you normally get home? They say 6 o'clock. I say, well, 6 o'clock, you probably have some dinner, watch a little bit of TV. By the time you realize it, it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, it's time to go to bed. And you're tired when you get to bed. But what's the last thing that you think about when your head hits that pillow? And then you shut up and listen to that answer. And you'll be amazed at some of the things you hear when you ask that question. And it sounds like one of those psychological, I want to get in there, airy fairy, hug a tree. It's not one of those questions. Trust me, when you ask that question, if you went to all of your clients right now and asked them that question, they would have some interesting answers. And in all probability, you've never asked your clients that question. And your clients are waiting for someone to ask them that question. And then complete this sentence. When it comes to my money and financial situation, the only thing I really care about is whatever it is. And they'll fill that blank in there pretty quick. So I'll leave you with those 10 questions. Again, building empathy. Before the call, what can you do to build empathy? Just make sure that you put yourself in the frame of mind of that particular prospect or client. You want to find out as much about them as you can. What I do sometimes today is I'll go on social media and I'll look up people that I'm going to see so that I'm familiar with them a little bit. I might have some, if I want to build commonality with them, I might want to look at Facebook or LinkedIn to see what they're interested in, what their interests are. I can see, people put all kinds of things, as you know, on Facebook. Some things you don't want to see, but some things you do want to see. You want to see who they hang out with, the kinds of things they do, hobbies they might have, so that when you see them, you can expedite that relationship building phase. I'm just going to try and move this to the next one. A little sensitive here. There we go. So the thing that we're focusing on is the gap. The history and background of their situation. Those 10 questions will help. Problems and causes, impact and consequences of those problems, level of satisfaction, and you want to be in front of the decision maker. If they say, other people are involved and they need to have their accountant there to make a decision, you probably need to know that and what kind of person that accountant is or other decision maker at the table. And then on the other side of this page, what changes, improvements, advantages and gains, higher level of satisfaction, personal motives, and task motives. And those are two different things. And in the documents that I'll send you, it addresses what personal motives might be versus task motives. Mortgage insurance is mortgage insurance. A task motive for me to have life insurance to protect my mortgage. But I have personal motives for having that mortgage insurance. Because, I'd love to sit here and tell you that everybody in Canada has mortgage insurance, but they don't. A lot of people don't have their mortgage insured. They have $50,000 or $100,000 of life insurance, and they have a $400,000 mortgage, and it may or may not be insured. And it's because they don't need to. It's not a need, it's a want. And we've got to think about insurance as a want product, not a need product. You can die without life insurance, but is that what you want to do? There might be some personal motives as to why you don't want to embarrass your name, reputation, and family after you're gone, leaving everybody in the hands of a bunch of debt and the clutches of Revenue Canada. But I'm not here to debate that part. We'll just move on. So the discovery agreement is a document that I'm going to talk about next month in a webinar that I want to run. And it's about stated goals and objectives. So after this fact-finding exercise that we'll go through, we'll find out what exactly it is you're trying to do, the outcome of this planning. And then I want to deal with the situation, the assessment, and my recommendation. The situation is you currently have blah, 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 blah. My assessment is based on what you want to do, those stated goals and objectives. We probably are a little bit lacking here. I'd recommend some more of this, some more of that. And those would be my recommendations. And behind that page of recommendations, and there's usually about 7 or 8 recommendations every time. And some of them are just, getting a will, getting a living trust, finishing up some professional documents, and then backup information and illustrations would be the backup of that document. So I'll show you some samples of some documents in that next month's webinar, where we'll actually go through, the resulting documentation of what's obtained by proper fact finding. This gentleman, I want the first person to send me the name of this person. So I want to get in the chat room, those of you who are still with me, which there are many, send me the name of this individual before I go to the next one. Next slide. But if you want to be happy, set a goal that commands your thoughts, liberates your energy, and inspires your hopes. A man who acquires, now this would be today, a person who acquires the ability to take full possession of his own or their own may take possession of anything else to which he is justly entitled. No man becomes rich unless he enriches others. And Yermi, you're on the ball, buddy. Now, not Napoleon Hill from my other individual, but Yermi, I'm going to send you a copy of a book. Good one. Yermi just posted something, I should say, on social media, that he had a client of his receive the benefit of a critical illness policy in a substantial amount. And Yermi, congratulations on and doing a great job. It is Dale Carnegie, you're correct. And if you haven't read his book on influencing people, you might want to don't Google it, because you'll get all kinds of backlash and see all kinds of commentary that's probably not relevant. And again, with the noise out there, but I would suggest that reading this book would not hurt you at all, particularly if you're trying to be an empathic advisor. And the other book that I recommend, oh, here it is Win-Win Selling So you can go on Amazon and get Win-Win Selling, Turning Customers' Needs into Sales by Larry Wilson on Amazon. Win-Win Selling. I'll email this out to you as well. Yarmy, I'll get you a copy of this book free of charge for participating today. And anybody have any comments or questions that they want to put in this chat box right now? Okay, I'm going to flip over for a second to the documentation that I want to share with you that is also going to come out to you. As I said, Lisa and I were able to compile this over the last few days. And it is about, are you asking enough questions? You need to unearth needs and wants before you talk about solutions to your prospect. And I'm just going to cursory go through this for a minute because it's an excellent document. If I can, there we go, sorry. And there's a table of contents. So are you asking enough questions? That's the title of our show. Major blunders that most advisors make, the power of emotional-based questions. So there's things in here from Zig Ziglar. I've got things in here from Brian Tracy about are you asking enough questions? John Maxwell, who you're probably all familiar with. He has a Minute with Maxwell on social media. I'd suggest that you watch that Minute with Maxwell. If you've not seen it on YouTube, go to YouTube and Google Minute with Maxwell, John Maxwell. And it's a very inspiring message every day that he puts out. It's pretty good. Power of emotional-based questions. Again, getting to the emotional side. People buy insurance based on emotion, not logic necessarily, right? So when's the last time you listened yourself out of a sale? I don't think I've ever listened myself out of a sale. Pre-qualifying power questions for setting appointments. So how to set those appointments. And that is by Lou Nason out of the US. Sample fact-finding probing questions, how to probe a little deeper. We've got typical questions for retirees, so people who currently have retired. And I've Canadianized this, so there's this was some American documentation, but we've changed 401ks to RSPs, government benefits. There's Social Security to CPP OAS. So you'll see Canadian versions of this. Typical pre-retiree questions, consultative selling questions for pre-retirees, more of those feeling finding questions. How much income will you need in retirement? How did you come up with that figure? How much would you like to have in order to generate that income? Really, really good series of questions throughout here that you can start sprinkling into your fact-finding opportunities. Questions about seminars, selling, setting appointments, and fact-finding. If you're doing a seminar or a webinar, some great questions that are sprinkled in here that you can add to your repertoire. Money management, income taxes, living trusts, mortgage protection, disability income, more fact-finding types of questions. There's some repetitiveness in here, but that's okay. You can edit those out. Asking enough questions for the key to your ultimate success, back to Dale Carnegie. This paragraph or page is excellent. Just a great page to read to keep you inspired and motivated to carry on. So I just wanted to share that stuff with you. Thanks for joining me today. I'm just going to check the chat box if there's any more questions. How can we find the IDC Fact Find mentioned? It's on the IDC Win Big site. So if you log into IDC Win Big, you can go there and source that out under fact finding, under compliance documents. I believe it's in the compliance documents area. I'd love a summary of the 10 questions. You'll get those 10 questions. Thank you. There you go. Okay, no more. Yes, we will mail all the all the documents to the attendees. And you could you send me a link to this? We've recorded this as well, so this will be on Win Big in the next couple of days. So you'll have this, and I look forward to seeing you next month. So again, folks, thanks a lot for your time. It's 2:02. Appreciate your attention, and good luck. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.